Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to the second episode of the Precipice Fiction podcast. We have some new voices, some new faces with us this episode. May I introduce Phoenix?
Hello.
And James.
Hello.
And joining us from last week, I'm Ali, and Alex is also here.
Hello.
So this week we're diving into research, the kind of research we do for our own practice and how we might have different methodologies about how we go about our research. I just wanted to ask everyone, though, how they've been this week and what they've been watching, what they've been reading. Phoenix?
So for fun, I've been reading Lord of the Rings lately, and I have been loving it. Like everyone, I'd been intimidated to pick it up because everyone that had talked about it was like, oh, it's really dense. But one thing I'm learning about myself, I love dense and kind of mundane. So I'm actually like, it's like in my top 5. Like I'm loving it. So reading Lord of the Rings, but mostly I've been doing a lot of editing lately. So just reading a lot of people's other work.
Right, because you've recently started... freelancing, I guess. You've started accepting edits and giving critique. How's that been going?
It's been going very well. I've been pulling in some 5-star reviews, and I'm actually booked out through into March. Like I am not available for some time, and people are reaching out still. And I actually have to tell them, like, I'll put you in the calendar, but are you cool to wait? And they're all very excited. I'm loving it. I didn't think I would like editing this much, but I actually am discovering that I do love it. That's well as cool. Right now, my critique eye is sharp. Like while I'm reading Lord of the Rings right now, I'm like, that's a nice sentence. Oh my gosh, well constructed. So
yeah,
it's cool.
No, I love that. I wish I had the same discipline to tell people to wait a month with the. So I do a bit of screenplay editing as well, but I very happily just say yes to everyone, and then I wonder why I'm overloaded and can't meet deadlines.
Oof, it's rough.
But I do love it for that same reason, that it keeps just like the editing muscles warm and sharp to bring it back to your own writing. I know that. I'll give some advice, and I'm like, yeah, no shit, that's good. And then I reflect, and I'm like, why don't I take my own advice and then go back to my own work and implement the same thing I just told someone else to do?
Yeah, my mom recently sent me a snippet of something I wrote because she liked it, and I saw a comment that shouldn't be in there, and I was like, oh no, like I know too much.
James, what have you been up to?
With reading, you guys are going to laugh at me. I never finished the Harry Potter series, so I've just gone back to read the last 2 of those. I finished the Half-Blood Prince last week.
Brilliant. Oh, well, we won't spoil anything for you.
I think I exist in the world, so I've heard like quite a few spoilers, but I'm kind of enjoying seeing how they're like set up.
Yeah.
No, her plotting is marvelous. Like you can kind of track it from book 4 onwards. Like it's almost like the first 3 were standalone. It's almost as if she didn't know she was going to get the full series. But from book 4 onwards, you can see everything's planted and set up. The finale's set from book 4, and that's really tight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very tight for sure.
And Alex, what have you been reading at the moment?
Yeah, what have I been reading? So I've been my main book that I've been going over is Ghost Story by Peter Straub, and it is I'm kind of waiting for payoff. It's very slow to start off with. It's very much in that small town spooky sort of Stephen King vibe. So I'm a big fan of that. But it is very slow. It's getting there, so I'm doing that to sort of stay in the world of like spooky horror based stuff. But then just for funsies, I've been replaying Final Fantasy IX. You know that one on the Yeah, Phoenix is just like, I remember that. You know, the one on PS1 that's like set in like medieval times and stuff, and it's just like, I don't know, it's not, high fantasy isn't usually my vibe, but I was like, but it's Final Fantasy, so, you know, and I just remember playing it as a kid and being like, that's awesome. So that's what I've been doing for that. Yeah, and just editing my own book, which has been kind of confronting, but also very exciting. You know, you like get through one section and rewrite it and go like, oh, that's what that was missing. And then that sort of leads you to another part. And then, yeah, editing is a very interesting and thought-provoking process when you're doing it, like big, hard chops. It's, you know, it's tough, but rewarding.
Yes. No, I can 100% speak to this because it wasn't my intention at the start of last week, but I have absolutely fallen down the rabbit hole of reworking my manuscript for my historical fiction. And interesting enough, it came about because of some new research I had done. Say the start of last year, I did some bulk sit-down research, read all I could, got all the facts I could and lined them up into a big old plotting kind of document, and then ran away, wrote the thing. I've kind of come back now for this second batch of research, and I'm finding things I didn't find in my first load of research. And initially I was kind of alarmed. I'm like, how did I not find this? It's nothing that's completely upending the plot or changing too many things, but it's enough for me to be like, oh, that's really cool. I want to include that. And
Easter eggs.
Yeah, what it's done has just been this knock-on effect. Like one character who was famously Scottish is now Irish. So I have combed through the entire manuscript, just changing word choice and kind of sentence structure just to properly reflect that there has been an adjustment in accent there.
Changing all the I's to ox, right?
I'm not that deliberate in the, I mean, I've got some apostrophe like yourself rather than like your, it's yeah. But it's mainly just like sentence structure and word choice. Like I don't want to put too many O sounds in there if they're not Scottish anymore. That didn't feel right anymore. And also one of the children changed gender based on some new documents I found. So it's just kind of combing through and changing the gender of a child. So I've kind of embraced these changes, and initially I was alarmed, but I'm feeling a bit better about it because I've since discovered that these facts only came to light within the last year. So these documents didn't actually exist for me to find at the start of last year when I did my big sit-down research. So I was able to take the pressure off myself being like, oh, I wasn't silly and I just didn't find it. They literally didn't exist to find. They've only just, it's ongoing research that's coming to light now. So it was really exciting that I'm like, oh, we didn't know that the smallest child was a boy until only a couple of months ago. So there's something really exciting about this just being like on the pulse, new information that I am combing my research to.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, like when you come back to an edit and like discover, you know, like you're like, oh no, that's totally wrong there. But then once you start to dig into it, you sort of find these threads. Like there's always the intimation for me as a writer that I'm like, well, you can't really go through and make these big changes because like the butterfly effect, the whiplash of that through the plot will just like completely skew everything. But no, when you break it down, you usually find, for me at least, things are fairly compartmentalized. And then there's like one or two little details where you're like, oh, well, I'll just delete that or just change that to another sentence. Like it's surprising how modular the different parts of it are. And that's not something I really realized going through the first write that I'd done. I was like, oh, I can actually just pretty radically change this and not completely destroy the story. So yeah, that's been something interesting I found.
Yeah, no, I agree. Someone used a metaphor to me once that it's just like combing hair and just making sure all the strands point in the same direction. And that's kind of how I think about it when I'm like, great, we're changing the baby to a boy. So then I'm just combing through now. And it was kind of fun that I had some back and forth dialogue before that was about main character kind of thankful he didn't have a son because he had such a poor relationship with his own father. And then now bombshell, now he's going to have a son. So it's given me the opportunity for him to have this quite bizarre and rocky relationship with this baby boy that he doesn't have with his daughters. So it doesn't change things for me. I'm like, the character's still the same, but it's just the opportunity to do something different and embrace it. Yeah.
Like a new improv prompt to throw into the mix. It's like, what if we change the formula, like a little petri dish? We'll take that little bit out and see what that does.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, exactly. I've been thinking about writing more and more like not so much puzzle pieces, but just working with Lego lately, because I realize puzzles is a poor metaphor because puzzle pieces can only fit together in one way. But Lego, so 2 scenes that I have ended up completely rewriting. It's not that I've completely chucked them away. I've just broken down the thing with the same Lego pieces. I've just unclicked it all, and then I just clicked it all back together in a new shape. So other people might look at it and be like, this is a completely brand new scene, but kind of the architect behind it, I'm like, oh no, it's the same. I've just, built it different.
It helps, like, Ali, you've actually been a bit of an inspiration in terms of planning. I remember you posted a video like a long time ago of you putting like a bunch of sticky notes. I think it was probably for Cyprus or something, but like blocking out all your scenes. And I was like, wow, that's the kind, like, I really lack that, I have ideas and stuff, but I do not have that sort of like arc reference, scene reference. So I could just like take a note and be like, I'll write this scene this day. Because I feel like once I'm in a scene, I'm very comfortable and I'm very capable, but like planning my trajectory has always been like, I really have to hold myself down and do it. So with the novel I'm working on, that's been like a big part of it, is like, all right, make sure like, oh, I don't know what I'm writing today. And it actually doesn't feel like the type of thing that I should push myself through to write. It's like, no, actually take yourself back. You're planning today. Like, you're not right. I don't know what to write because I don't know where I'm going. And I need more of my road laid out in front of me before I can actually write with authority. So all this is to say, I finally did the process of like fully blocking out scenes, what characters are in these scenes, what's being accomplished in this scene, what narrative weight does this scene carry, and all this stuff. And it's a beautiful practice. And like getting to the end of like 10 scenes and being like, okay, now I actually want to go back and write a little bit, because I kind of have to see how it plays out before I can plan more. But all this feeds into that, like the modularizing your book, because it's like, I know I want these scenes. Chances are these are going to be in, I have no idea what order these are going to be in, but I know these scenes are important. So really, like, it's a very non-linear process, and it's very modular indeed. Like, full, yeah.
I love that. Because so for
also, I never say indeed. I don't know why I did there.
We're being formal because we've all got microphones in front of us.
Yeah, indeed.
On that. So my novel it's a threaded novel of like 2 different timelines, and I had to go. So when I wrote the first draft, I did write it as I was jumping from this timeline to this timeline to this timeline, and I think I was only capable of doing that because I did sit down, block it out, I did know my every scene before I put words on the page. I am trying something a bit more organic, moving into, the scary book too, where I've decided I'm actually going to write one timeline in one batch, as if it was like a mini novella, and then write the other timeline. So I'm actually attempting to do the exact opposite in the second book than I did with the first. But what blocking each scene ahead of time really helped me with was I didn't overwhelm myself with the research I had to do. So before I started, I did all this reading, took note of all the things, and like I had a vague master timeline of this character's life, but I didn't go like super in depth. I've always been like, research should be in service of what I'm immediately writing or what I'm immediately plotting. I'm not the kind of person to go away and just read 100 books and not write, because I'm just like, I need to get writing. I will only research as much as I need to feel like I have enough to start writing. So I kind of did all that research until I had my plotting done. And then as I sat down at the keyboard per scene, so it's like, oh, this day I'm working on this scene, I need to know what the jail in Burnham looked like this year. So it's only at that point do I ask myself that question, then maybe spend an hour on Google trying to find references and paintings and illustrations. And then once I have that key bit of information, then I start writing. I'm also one of the type of writers where I will actually stop. I will halt if I don't have a detail and will Google. And I know this can be a bit controversial. I wanted to ask the group if they, what was their method? Because I know some people will either just put like in brackets, come back, look this up later and keep writing because they don't want to interrupt the flow of writing. Or there's the maniacs like me who will be like, stop the halt of words to go Google. James?
Yeah, that's exactly the thing I wanted to say about research, because I'm a big fan, a big advocate of research, but it is exactly that thing that if I've decided I'm going to write something and then it's like, oh, well, hold on, I'll just research down a rabbit hole for like 2 weeks and not write the actual scene. So It's much better for me, I've found, if I just try to fire away and get as much of the scene written as possible and sort of just have in parentheses, like, I have no idea what the surroundings look like. And then I'll go back and just do tons and tons of research into that and probably rework the scene around it. But I have to have enough of the scene written that I'm now committed to learning and reworking the scene around the information.
See, that sounds like the really sensible way to do it. But I've just never had the balls to be like, just, put in brackets, leave this and keep going. I'm like, no, I need it. I need to know.
Whenever I'm doing that, I'm always very proud of myself when I do the brackets and make myself keep writing, because sometimes research is a way for me to avoid writing when it's like, no, like hold yourself down sort of thing. So I feel like I split into two people at that point. There's like the me that grabs me by the collar and keeps dragging me, and the me that's being dragged by the collar that's like reaching back, like, no, but I just make myself keep going. It's like, no, bracket it. You're writing now. Get the words out.
I feel like if you do so much research into the subject, you can start to be like, oh, well, no, the scene I had in mind won't work because maybe it's not practical and it could put you off writing it that way. I feel like you need to have enough of it there that when you go do the research and realize, oh, this doesn't really get in scene, doesn't work. I'll try to rework as much of this as possible to fit in the actual information. And it ends up working much better that way. Or it can even, if something is a bit stagnant or maybe something isn't working, it can unblock that, or it can give you a bit of inspiration of like, oh, great, well, now I know if this is here or if this works this way.
The way I've been approaching it so far has been, well, the first one I did was sort of a sci-fi thing, so there was like less, I don't know, just more pure imaginative fuel for that. But the one I'm doing now is sort of set in the Blue Mountains, so it's literally just compilations of houses that I've lived at in my life, and I can see exactly how the house looks. And if I think about it, I can actually piece it together from various things. But because it's so, I like to write as much as I can from life, at least in the genre and style that I'm doing right now. So a lot of that, like the basis of the research will actually be done as I'm walking around, like months before I've started writing it. So I'm just looking around at it. Like I started doing another sort of similarly vibed thing, and it was just based on this house that was next door. It was just this creepy house that was completely built, but then also completely overgrown. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like an interesting ghost story. And I just sort of wandered around that and had a peek into it and stuff, which was really fun. But in terms of, actually stopping and sort of like mid-sentence just going like, oh, I don't know what that old record player is called. I am definitely guilty of kind of jumping onto Google and going like, oh, okay, so it was an RCA Victrola. Okay. Oh, no, wait, that company was formed after this scene is written. So it was something else. But yeah, I'm just like, look, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to get to it until, I guess maybe I would eventually. But so I'm definitely guilty of that crime.
Yeah, no, I feel like I've experienced both where, as James said, that I would have moments of knowing too much about a scene from the research where I'm like, oh, the thing I actually wanted to do, I can't pull off. But then at the same time, I like the creative knot of like, well, how can I, have the best of both worlds? How can I make this as accurate as possible, but still want to do the silly, weird thing I want to do? And then as Alex said, I've also had moments of I've found a little tidbit. So, maybe this record player wasn't made this year. Oh, but they had this instead. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then it kind of runs off as its own new thread that I have this new piece of information I didn't have before. But changing this character from Scottish to Irish was like ripping off a limb, because I had gotten quite attached to this Scottish character, and he had been a bit of a favorite among beta readers. So I really had to embrace this moment of, well, if this character's now Irish, and look, they're literally in like the Australian, Tasmanian, Irish convict records, like it would be just falsified to keep them Scottish. It was just not information I had at the start. Now I know they're Irish, so I'm like, well, what's an opportunity to make this better? And because I'm kind of working in dark comedy, my answer was to like find jokes to replace the jokes I had. And some new information that also came out of my research was confirming that my main character is Protestant. So I'm now armed with this idea that I have a Protestant main character and I have this Irish character. And I'm like, well, that conflict writes itself, doesn't it? So I'm trying to embrace this new layer that I didn't have before to make up for like, oh, I've lost this Scottish character, but now this new vitriol can come out of the dialogue to make up for it.
That's always the fun question about historical fiction, isn't it? Like, because how close do you want to keep it to the original? Like, I know that book that I kept recommending you, Mutiny on the Bounty by Patrick, I think. I mean, he's definitely like, I found the papers. I've literally like scripted this as much as I can. I've kind of invented some dialogue where I haven't been able to find it, but like, this is the facts. This is how it happened. But then, you'll go into some sort of like old school, like Roman Empire sort of historical fiction, and that'll just be kind of like, well, we just kind of made it up. It's whatever we could do, and it's like, that's fine too. I guess you'd call that historical fantasy if you wanted.
I'm one of the things I'm writing is it started as a medieval Italian role-playing game, and actually has now turned into its own like role-playing system that I'm publishing. So that's cool, and I have some people reviewing that, which is exciting. But just speaking of like ripping off limbs and research, so it takes place during the Black Death in Italy, and like for the most part it's very to the timeline, and I got really excited because I was like, oh, one of the big players of that time was Nostradamus, and like everyone knows that name. He's very like surrounded in mysticism and known for his crazy prophecies and quatrains and stuff. But then I had written a whole bunch around him in my plot. And then it was only like maybe a month ago, I realized, wait, he wasn't around during 1300s Black Death. He was around during, I think, like the 1600s or something, like a different onset of the plague. As well as that's when like plague doctors started popping up. The iconic image that people are used to is the later outburst. So it just created a decision for me of like, all right, so what's worth more to you? What's the story I want to tell? And it's one with, I want Nostradamus in there, and I want, well, plague doctors, I don't care so much about that, but like, I want Nostradamus in there. So instead it created a lot of inspiration for, I had to get really honest with myself. Like, I do want to keep this limb on, but I do have to present this limb differently.
Yeah, no, basically my goal for it is if there are known facts, I am trying to weave them into the plot. So if I do discover new information, I am taking the time to course correct. Thankfully, yeah, all the stuff that's come up isn't going to change the overall arc of my story, and it's not changing the core of my characters. And I guess the character core is what I'm getting the most joy out of, is like the fiction I'm creating is imagining who they are, and there's no real facts I can stumble upon that's going to counter that. It's only just little timeline things about, oh, they did this first before they went there. That's okay. That's a single scene adjustment. That it's not the end of the world. It is interesting that I'm working in comedy, though, because a lot of my situations are so kind of absurd and larger than life. I think a lot of people might read this and not actually believe how much of it is true, just by its nature, because so many of my scenes are over the top, and it's the genre, it's comedy. People are like, oh, this has just been exaggerated for comedic effect.
Yeah.
Where it was almost the opposite for me. I'm reading about these insane things that actually happened, and I'm like, the only genre this could be told in is absurd comedy. It makes me think of a similar example with Public Enemies, the John Dillinger movie that came out a couple of years ago, where they actually had to tone down some of the real life things that actually happened, because they were going for this kind of serious, dramatic biopic genre, and the real life facts didn't fit that genre they were writing. If they had included the fact that he had taken out 30 guards instead of 3 guards, suddenly they would have been in like an action film territory, right? And they're like, it's a betrayal of genre. The audience won't be on board with it.
So funny.
Yeah, but I'm always having the opposite problem, where my genre is comedy. So I don't think people will believe what's happened. They'll think everything's exaggerated. So it's almost, I'm really interested in this interaction of history and the genre you end up working with, and how that will dictate how much freedom you have and what you use and what the give and take is.
I love that from, because I haven't told many, like the thing I'm writing about medieval Italy is all fiction. Like the only thing that's staying the same is setting. That's where most of my research is surroundings, buildings, cities, like what's physically there. So when people are wandering around, it's accurate. But looking back at historical events and seeing as like the core of storytelling is communication, and how do I want to communicate this to someone, because not just if you just speak to someone, it's not necessarily communicating it to them. Like you want to get them to feel it. And it's like poetry. It's like, how do you best communicate a sensation or a feeling? So like with storytelling, it's like, all right, yeah, how do I best communicate this event? How do I make someone understand it and not just hear it? And I love that from the perspective of looking back at historical events and needing to get really honest, like, what's the best way for someone to understand this event? And actually the genre is comedy. It needs to be told through a comedic lens for people to understand how absurd that event was. And all it is communicating real life. So it's needing to determine what genre certain events in life fall into, and life isn't inherently comedic, and sometimes comedy is the answer for communicating it.
Yeah, it's like sort of attaching different filters to things, like you can have a day in someone's life that could be interpreted so many different ways if you put it into a narrative form. Like I don't know, for example, Ulysses by James Joyce is basically just 2 men's days, and some stuff happens in them, but like really it's just 2 days, just like one day that they're both experiencing. But he's framed it as literally an epic story. Like he's framed it in the context of Ulysses' journey, essentially. So I feel like I'm probably mixing up some mythic fiction there a little bit, but no, it was a journey. But in the same way, you could condense that down into like a tiny little farce. Like, they could just be like, oh, and we did this, and then that happened, and he went to a whorehouse, and then da-da-da-da-da-da. Like there's so many different ways you can filter an event. And I mean, you can do that in real life as well, but it's super obvious in narrative. But yeah, like you have to make sure that you're utilizing the resources that you have in terms of the research and discovering the things that actually happened, and sort of piling them up in a way that's going to lean into that specific filter, genre, story.
Yeah, I love the idea of the individual lens, and this is something I've had to make peace with, because I am putting so much energy and so much of myself into this story that is ultimately a true story. therefore I don't own these characters per se. Anyone could come and do their own telling of these events. And it's about me not being precious about, oh, this is mine, only I can tell this story, and not holding any of that anxiety, because we've got a million versions of Ned Kelly for the same reason, that it's this mythos and people come in with their own take about it. And it's, so when I read about these events that happened, my take straight away is like, this could only be told through absurd comedy, like but obviously a creative could read the same events and be like, oh no, this is actually like a tragedy. I could come and tell a tragedy based on this. And it's I love that room to play, being able to arrange the many creatives could come to the same building blocks and build their own thing. I did want to quiz you guys on kind of your modes of research. We've talked about the quick cheeky Google to find what we're after. But if anyone else had kind of done more above and beyond research, I kind of thought of my own experience reaching out to researchers in particular. So there is a single non-fiction book based on the work I'm doing. So I reached out to the author who works at the New South Wales Library, and he's been incredibly generous and receptive, and he sent me photocopies of a lot of his his sources. So he's done the legwork and say he's gone to like the London archives and he's found the court transcripts, and he has copies of those, so he's photocopied them and sent them to me. So I have this massive dossier of all the photocopies he's shared with me, which is incredible, because it means I don't have to go to the London archives, right, and try and dig up these documents. And there's also been a man at the Sydney Maritime Museum I'm also in good contact with, who's also been incredibly helpful. So I didn't know if anyone else had any other examples of just the goodwill. Sometimes we're so insular in our own research, but the moment you do start talking to other people and you tell them you're a creative, my personal experience has been this sense of generosity, that people just get excited about the idea and are willing to help and share ideas.
I honestly, it had not occurred to me, I had not thought of reaching out to people, but I love that idea, and I think I'm actually going to look into some people that might be able to, like some historians or even just history teachers, whatever, that might be able to input. For me, it's mostly been, seeing as it is terrain and landscape and surroundings, it's mostly been, I look at a map of Italy and Sicily and I pay attention to the altitudes and geography and stuff. And then I look up some pictures of that place. And then sometimes I find ruins or whatever, and then I kind of need to Google, all right, was that there in the 1300s? What was everyone's relationship to that place in the 1300s? Like the ruins to us now, were they ruins to people then? Or were they active then? And a lot, it's surprising how much of it were still ruins even then. It's such an old place. It's oh yeah, nobody's been there for hundreds of years, even in the 1300s. So it's been cool. As a result, it's just amazing how much you learn just from an idea. I wanted to create this role-playing game, and now I have a lot of knowledge about Black Death, 1300s Italy and stuff. It's very cool.
James?
Yeah, I would have gone out and done interviews with people. And like you're saying, I found people were very willing to come, and I was interviewed nurses and people who were kind of would do jobs that I guess you wouldn't really know a lot about unless you actually sat down and chatted with people. And like you said, I found people very open and very interested to come and sit down and chat with you about their jobs, and you can let them kind of express themselves about the job, and that gives you a great feel for what people's attitude is, if you know what I mean, within the environment that they work in. So I found that really useful.
Yeah, no, I wish I almost want to be more plucky and go out there and actually speak to people more often, because every time I have bitten the bullet and done it, it's always been incredibly receptive. People, funny enough, people like talking about themselves. Yeah. So if you give them that opportunity, and if they know it's a story that's going to get shared, they're really into it. And a really recent example I had is I've discovered only recently in Tasmania there was a a local council celebrated kind of the 200-year anniversary of the event I'm writing about. So there were the local theatre had like put on like just a 4-man, I don't know, retelling of the event that happened in Pirates Bay in Tasmania. And so like straight away, I'm just like, well, one, why didn't anyone invite me? That's so rude. But two, like who do I get in contact with? People are actively researching this. And to this point, I was only aware of like the 3 people who were researching this. And I'm kind of making it my priority and my prerogative to get in contact with whoever's like, what's the zeitgeist? If people are talking about it, I need to be a part of the conversation. So within 24 hours, I had managed to find the event organizers in this local council. We're now chatting. I'm going to set up a Zoom with her. So I found the woman who wrote the plays and who's been leading the research. So it's my intention to make her my best friend now. and just sharing our ideas, because I think we're both equally excited as creatives that other people have spent so much time in this same world. And there's not many of us. Like I said, you could probably count on one hand how many people in Australia are researching this story. So it's just like, we found our people. And it's, very exciting feeling.
So you just sort of reached out and just emailed them, or like did you just jump on Twitter? And I'm so bad at like finding how to get in contact with like the idea of talking to people sounds great, but like for some reason I'm like the idea of like reaching out and being like, hello, Professor blah blah blah. I am a novelist. And
I am a writer.
The topic. Yours sincerely, Alexander R. Eldridge.
I could talk to my 3 different experiences and how they unfolded. So the first one, reaching out to the man who wrote the book, who works at the New South Wales Library. So I couldn't really find, he did have a LinkedIn, but he didn't seem very active on it. I did send a message, but it went unanswered. So then I contacted, there's like an open inquiry, the New South Wales Library. So I looked up where he worked, and then I was able to send an inquiry through the library, and just trying to phrase things so I don't sound like a psycho. Yeah. But I'm just like, look, if you're able to pass on a message to him, that would be amazing. And they're like, we did. He's a little. It's like it's the middle of COVID, so they're like, they're all working remotely, so they're like, we'll just wait to hear. And eventually, he did slide into my emails a couple of weeks later, and it was very exciting. Yeah.
That's opening the email, being like, "Ooh, it's the guy I tried to reach."
Yeah, it's the guy I've been stalking. And it was much faster with the man I approached at the Maritime Museum. That was a LinkedIn sliding into the messages. He replied within 30 minutes. We swapped emails. He was incredibly excited. And he's been very generous with his time and letting me bother him with questions. This most recent one is I just made a really public song and dance on my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I tagged, so I was able to look up what the local historical society was called, and the individual local paper that was reporting and promoting the event. So I've been kind of coy on my social media about what I've been writing. I've just been saying, I'm writing historical fiction, but I haven't like named the story or the characters I'm working on. But I finally decided that I'm like, well, now's the time for me to be really loud about it so people can reach out to me. So I tagged them all in my really loud post saying, I'm a creative working on this. And then she got in contact with me. She's like, I run the local community Facebook page. I saw your posts. Let's be friends and chat. And I'm like, perfect. That's what I wanted. That is why I made a lot of noise online yesterday. So we've got another little reading similar to last week that kind of ties in everything we've been talking about. So the little section I wanted to read from my historical fiction, and again with a little asterisk that this is a work in progress, it is a scene that is incredibly absurd. And it's going to read like a comedy scene. But it is also one of the most well-documented scenes of my entire work, because it is something that was told at the trial. We have the trial documents, and it was something that was recounted by everyone who was on the stand. So we have like 5 different people talking about this one event, and we can corroborate that they all said kind of the same thing. So we know that this, of all the absurd things that happened, this is almost the most well-documented absurd event. So
I'm excited. Just want to say.
So this is the actual mutiny. 9 armed convicts rushed to starboard. At Ferguson's instruction, they ducked behind the rail and concealed themselves. Once the Jolly was within pissing range, it was Matthew Pennell who straightened and aimed his musket down at the 4 increasingly nervous men below. "Ahoy, the lieutenant," Pennell hollered down. "I'll have blood this supper." Will strode to intercept, but his speed was hindered by the complaints of his stomach wound. "Pen," he began. The madman fired. Will stooped, senses rattled by the crack. Smoke billowed from the firearm, but it seemed not much else, only a flash in the pan, much to his relief. Below in the rocking Jolly, the 4 men recovered from their cringing postures, patting themselves down, checking to see if all their flesh was where they recalled it. The surgeon in particular seemed the most concerned for his well-being. Pennell gave the weapon a shake and a curse, and before Will could intercede, had it raised once more. The musket cracked, flashed, and again failed to ignite down the barrel. "Son of a bitch, put the thing down," Will roared. Pennell tried again, a third ear-splitting crack, and Will was now suitably deaf. For a third time, the Lord stayed the bullet. Will shoved Pennell's hands, aiming the barrel to deck. Still waiting for his hearing to return, he hoped the withering expression he delivered Pennell would be enough to momentarily quell the man. The effect was eroded by Will's pained stance as he was now forced to grip his stitches. With Pennell's proven impotence, another man stepped in to fill his role as a lunatic. "The brig is ours," screamed Towers, rising from concealment and brandishing his firearm. The other 8 followed suit, hollering and forming an intimidating line of muskets along the rail, each one trained on Lieutenant Carew. Ferguson had the lieutenant's cutlass in hand and was waving it about. Carew had gone quite pale, seeming rather shell-shocked. Pobjoy, meanwhile, had curled in the base of the Jolly, hands over his head. "We've prisoners below," Morgan announced, "and we won't hesitate to shoot the first man to step aboard." "My good men," Carew called with a rasp, "I beg of you, surrender the ship. You have my word, I'll think no more of this business. All will be forgotten, and none of it held against your records." "Be damned," Ferguson shouted and spat into the ocean. "Now sheer off in your dinghy before I have you in bits and serve you out." Hidden from sight, Will paced the back of the line, needing a moment to swallow his pain and regain his wits. From here he watched, and would do so until the moment the situation required his personal intervention. Carew's posture slumped, and he glanced at his first mate, perhaps for encouragement on how to proceed. "May I at least have my sword?" Carew called in a tone that bordered petulance. The line of convicts were consumed by fits of giggles. Carew's gall and lack of self-respect was astonishing to the point Will had to admire it. But the articles of war were clear. Lose the ship, lose the sword. Carew would have to plead for a new one at his court-martial. "Drink piss and die of it," was Ferguson's response. Carew removed his hat and combed his fingers over his balding head. A sheen of sweat glinted upon his crown. Will could almost see the cogs turning behind the lieutenant's eyes as the man weighed his poor hand against his weaker ability to bargain. "Will you return my wife and children?" he called. Ferguson barked with laughter. "You have to admire a man who asks for his ship and sword before his woman." The convicts howled their derision. Ferguson opened his mouth to deliver his answer, but Will halted him with a hand on his shoulder. He approached the rail and saw Carew's gaze fix on Will's new gold-trimmed coat. Surprise, then resignation contorted Carew's features. "This be your venture, Master Swallow." "Captain Swallow, if you please." "Be rational," Carew said, a new edge of desperation. He apparently saw in Will someone to be reasoned with and who wouldn't inspire bloodshed for the sport of it. "Call them off. See there is no further harm and set things to rights." Will gestured about him, drawing attention to the convicts and their firearms. "Man, my man, can't you see I'm compelled?" he answered. "I see how you are situated, but I cannot assist." And that's the little section. So what I kind of love about this is we have exact quotes from the trial. We don't know who was lying on the stand, which is kind of the fun of it as well. But we have hearsay, like I said this person said this thing. Maybe they were lying or not. But I love the poetic nature of the gun fired 3 times, but it fails 3 times. Like we have the rule of 3 in fiction, right? 1, 2, 3. So that feels like utter fiction, that you would fire a gun 3 times and it would fail 3 times, but it did. And the idea that this lieutenant asks for his ship He asks for his sword, and then he asks for his family.
I think my favorite line in that is just the right at the beginning. You were like, the ship was within kissing distance. I just thought that was so nice. That was just such a fun little line there.
Wait, was it kissing distance or was it pissing distance?
Was it pissing or kissing? I couldn't hear. Which one was it?
It is pissing distance.
Okay,
but I'm open to making it. I think both work. Honestly,
it has a different. It certainly has a different resonance.
It could go either way. Yeah.
It's a difference of like a couple meters.
But yeah, this is a scene that only exists because we have the trial records. We have this insane account that was corroborated by several different people who were like, this lieutenant was incompetent and useless. And we have this, the trial's a lot of fun because for some reason it seems a lot of people have changed their story to make our main character seem innocent. So it's given me the ability for Will can say things like, oh, can't you see I cannot assist? I'm forced to do this. But then my creative input is that he's faking it. So both versions can be true. He did technically say this, but
it's Schrodinger's captain.
Exactly.
We talked about at the beginning about giving potential critiques, but I was like trying really hard to. I was like, all right, listen for something that maybe I could, like, it would be very forced. Like, I don't really have anything. The only thing that jumped out at me was like some of the terminology is just terminology I don't know. But even then, I was just kind of curious about it. Like, and obviously, if I was reading the whole book, I would know. But like, from this context, I was like, ooh, what is a jig? I forget the word you used, but there is some, I think, some ship terms that I was just like, what is that?
Right. And this is interesting and a question I'll pose to the group because so the two manuscripts I've written, one's fantasy and one's this historical fiction. And I've actually found the world building so much more freeing in the historical fiction because if I can just use all these terms and go nuts. And if readers don't understand it, there's this, they're like, well, I will go away and look it up. It's my lack that I don't understand what a forecastle is.
Figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. While in fantasy, a lot of my beta readers is like, I don't get this. You failed to explain this. and there's less willingness to just run with the terms and accept that it's a part of the world building.
True.
So I didn't know if anyone had similar experiences.
Yeah, I never really thought of that. I guess the aegis is on you as a fantasy writer to explain yourself, whereas the aegis is on the audience as a as a historical fiction reader to be like, oh well, this is clearly a thing. It's clearly I'm reading historical fiction. I should probably be up on this. It's on me. That's a fun little dichotomy that I never really considered, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, people love just to absorb these new words, and almost the more, for lack of a better word, foreign words I use, really specific, detailed words. People are like, that's cool. This is a well-researched historical fiction book because I'm learning new things. While in fantasy, people find that quite alienating if all the terms haven't been properly explained and served on a platter to them.
I wonder if that's more about readership than genre. Like, I don't know. A fantasy people, they're like, I know my tropes. And I want to, like, just as an example, I know my tropes and I know what this is, and anything that doesn't necessarily fall within this, it's up to you to explain because through being familiar with this genre, I know how this all works. So you need to, whereas like maybe historical fiction people are more like, I'm just here to learn. I just want to hear all the stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's a gross generalization.
So I love the idea of using jargon and using like in-world specific terms and dialogue. Used in Generation Kill to have the characters speak in terms that like nobody understood, but then they were presented the first time in a way that was obviously a little bit confusing, but kind of like drew attention to itself. And then afterwards, Weston, so that you sort of work it out for yourself. I noticed George R. R. Martin did the same thing a number of times in the first book, where he referred to the others and he referred to certain elements of magic the first time in a context where you didn't know what it meant. Maybe it was just a phrase, but then the next time it was about something specific. So you're actually, there's again, and now I know what it is. But I think there's certain techniques, there's a certain element of presenting it the first time casually, the way the characters would actually say it, which draws attention to itself. And then there's another time if you use it about something specific, if the reader is paying attention to get this or that word refers to this thing. But I love that. I think it gives so much that word coming up again, verisimilitude to anything, to fantasy, to science fiction, even to like an alien environment that you're not that familiar with.
I do love that. And I think there is an art to it, because it was something I because big fan of how George R. R. Martin does it and threads it in so casually that you just accept it's a part of the world. And I were like, I want to write like that. So I gave it a go, but managed to make a lot of my beta readers really mad. Yeah. So I think it's something that's a lot easier said than done. And it is a very fine art and balance to getting that right.
Yeah.
It's also like the tide is against you when you're a new writer as well, or don't have like a massive name or massive following, because it's like if you have a massive name, you start throwing out terms, people are like, oh, genius. And then whereas if you don't and you're throwing out terms, you could do it in the exact same way and people will be like, oh, the goal of this amateur writer. Like they just expect like this is poor writing, but it's like, no, it's actually the same. Like I don't know. It's just frame of mind a lot of the time.
I did experience this a bit writing Challenger, the first book. Because we were reading, you guys probably remember this, we were reading to our greater sort of fiction writer group, and some of the members of that audience are a little bit older, and throw something out that what to Ali or Phoenix would just be like, oh yeah, well of course that means like it's a jet car, it's a car that's like on jets and it goes like that. They were like, I didn't know what that was. I've never heard of that. So there was this, and a lot of these people are more literary fiction readers. So I feel like that was pushing them out of their comfort zone a bit. So I don't know. I'm thinking maybe it has to do with the demographic of the readership. Like maybe certain readerships tend to be more amenable to just being like, oh, that's the thing. Yeah, no, that sounds vaguely like something else I've heard. I can work out what that is. And some people are like, I'm not really comfortable with this. This doesn't really make sense to me. Which is just a bit of a peccadillo of whatever genre you're in, I guess. But yeah, it's just interesting.
I didn't come with a pre-prepared quote
I actually
to finish.
One.
You did. All right.
Yes. I found one as we were here. I was like, oh gosh, this would be a good quote. My quote, and it's very much in shall we say conversation with both of you guys' specific works, is never. It's Mark Twain, and he said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's always been one of my favorite. Seems a little appropriate.
100%. All right.
Love it.
Thank you for those who have listened and joining us on our second Precipice Fiction podcast. This has been Phoenix, James, Ali, and Alex. And we'll be back with another installment next time.
Sweet.
See ya.
See ya.
And then we'll tell Paddy to cut it there.
Yeah, I'll stop that.
Paddy, you better cut it here, Paddy.
You better cut it, Paddy, or we'll cut you.
Is this still the podcast, Paddy? You have to tell us.
Oh, maybe we cut it too soon. We should have kept it.
Oh no.
We'll just have music playing over this part.
Slowly our voices fade out as music fades.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.